When billionaire CEO Claire Reynolds' black card gets declined in front of a crowded Manhattan cafe, she never expects the quiet security guard who saves her from humiliation to be the same man whose job application she rejected just days before. What starts as a simple act of kindness becomes a collision of two broken souls, one hiding behind corporate power, the other rebuilding from tragedy. This is a story of second chances, hidden brilliance and love that blooms in the most unexpected places. Stay with me until the end of this incredible journey, and don't forget to comment which city you're watching from so I can see how far our story travels across the world. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Reynolds Tech's 42nd floor, each droplet racing down the glass like tears Claire Reynolds refused to shed. She stood motionless in her corner office, watching the city blur into watercolor streaks. Below her reflection ghosted against the storm. A woman who had everything and felt nothing. Ms. Reynolds. Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, hesitant and apologetic. The board meeting has been moved up to 3 o'clock. They're waiting in conference room A. Claire's jaw tightened. Another ambush disguised as a meeting. Another group of middle-aged men questioning every decision she made, every risk she took, every breath she drew as CEO of the company she'd built from nothing. At 34, she was the youngest tech CEO on the Fortune 500 list, and they never let her forget that some of them thought it was too young, too fast, too much. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes, she replied, her voice carrying the same steel that had silenced boardrooms from Silicon Valley to Wall Street. She turned from the window, her reflection dissolving into the storm. The woman staring back had perfectly styled auburn hair, a designer suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and eyes the color of winter mornings, beautiful, successful, and utterly alone. Claire had learned long ago that loneliness was the price of power, but some days the bill felt steeper than others. The elevator descended in silence, each floor marking another layer of the empire she'd built. Marketing on 38, development on 35. Legal on 32, hundreds of employees, whose livelihoods depended on her decisions, whose families she'd never meet, whose dreams rode on her shoulders. The weight should have felt crushing, but Claire had been carrying it so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. The boardroom doors opened to reveal the usual suspects. Harrison Webb, the silver-haired investor who thought women belonged in supporting roles. Marcus Chen, the former Google executive who'd never forgiven her for poaching 3 of his best engineers. And Patricia Lawson, the only other woman in the room who'd spent the last 5 years trying to prove she was nothing like Claire. "Gentlemen, Patricia." Claire took her seat at the head of the polished mahogany table, her movements precise and controlled. "I understand you have concerns about the Morrison account." Harrison leaned back in his chair, his smile predatory. "Concerns is putting it mildly, Claire. $3 million down the drain because you insisted on that experimental approach. Our investors are getting nervous. Innovation requires risk. Innovation requires results," Marcus interrupted, sliding a tablet across the table. "Morrison Industries is pulling out. They're going with Tecton Solutions instead." The words hit like a physical blow, but Claire's expression never wavered. Morrison had been her white whale, the account that would have pushed Reynolds Tech into the top tier of government contractors. 6 months of presentations, proposals, and promises gone. "What's their reasoning?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the earthquake in her chest. Patricia's smile was sharp as a knife. "They cited concerns about leadership stability and questioned whether Reynolds Tech has the experience to handle projects of this magnitude." The subtext was clear. They questioned whether she had the experience, whether a woman who'd started her company in a garage could play with the big boys, whether someone who'd clawed her way up from nothing belonged at tables like this one. "I see." Claire stood smoothing her skirt with practiced calm. "In that case, I suggest we focus our energy on the clients who appreciate what we bring to the table. The Hartfield presentation is next week, and I intend to make sure it's flawless." "Claire," Harrison's voice carried a warning. "The board is going to want answers. This isn't just about one lost account, it's about a pattern. The risks you're taking, the experimental approaches, the way you're running this company. Some people think it might be time for new leadership." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Claire met his gaze without flinching, her smile cold as Arctic wind. "Then those people are welcome to try," she said. "This meeting is adjourned." She walked out with her head high and her spine straight, but inside something was cracking. The elevator doors closed around her like a tomb, and for the first time in years, Claire Reynolds felt the weight of her empire trying to crush her. 40 minutes later, Claire sat in her favorite café 3 blocks from the office, staring at a half-empty cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Café Luna was her sanctuary, a small slice of normalcy in a life measured by stock prices and board meetings. The exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, and the soft jazz playing from hidden speakers made it feel like a place where she could almost remember who she used to be. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant, Harrison, called an emergency board meeting for Friday. Agenda, leadership review. Claire closed her eyes. Friday was 4 days away. 4 days to save her company, her reputation, everything she'd spent the last 10 years building. The vultures were circling, and she could feel their shadows blocking out the sun. "Another coffee, hon?" Claire looked up to find Maya, the cafe's owner, standing beside her table with a pot of fresh brew. Maya was somewhere in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a messy bun and the kind of genuine smile that reminded Claire why she'd fallen in love with this place. "Please," Claire managed, grateful for the interruption to her spiraling thoughts. "Rough day?" Maya asked, refilling the cup with practiced ease. "The roughest," Claire admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm fighting a war I can't win." Maya's expression softened. "Honey, I've been running this place for 23 years. I've served coffee to CEOs and janitors, billionaires, and broke college students. You know what I've learned? The people who think they can't win are usually the ones who need to win the most." Before Claire could respond, Maya had moved on to the next table, leaving behind the faint scent of vanilla and the warmth of unexpected wisdom. Claire wrapped her hands around the fresh cup, letting the heat seep into her fingers as she tried to gather the pieces of her composure. She reached for her purse to pay for the refill, her fingers closing around the familiar weight of her black American Express card, the one that never failed, never questioned, never judged. The one that had opened doors and commanded respect since the day she'd qualified for it. At the counter, she handed the card to the young barista, a college kid named Tommy, who always had paint under his fingernails and dreams in his eyes. "Thanks, Ms. Reynolds," he said, swiping the card through the reader. The machine beeped, then beeped again. Tommy frowned, tried the card a second time, then a third. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your card is being declined." The words hit the cafe like a thunderclap. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Phones appeared ready to capture the moment when Claire Reynolds, the Claire Reynolds, couldn't pay for a cup of coffee. Heat flooded her cheeks. This wasn't possible. She'd checked her accounts that morning. The card had a credit limit that exceeded the GDP of small countries. There had to be a mistake, a glitch, something. "Try it again," she said, her voice smaller than she'd heard it in years. Tommy's face was crimson as he swiped the card once more. The machine's rejection sounded like a death knell in the sudden silence of the cafe. "Ma'am, I'm really sorry, but here." The voice came from behind her, quiet but steady. Claire turned to see a man stepping forward from the line, his hand already extended with a worn $20 bill. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that needed a trim and eyes the color of October skies. His clothes were simple dark slacks, a white button-down, and a security badge clipped to his belt that read, "Carter Security Services." "I've got it," he said, handing the money to Tommy without fanfare. Claire stared at him, her mind reeling. I can't let you." "It's just coffee," he said with a slight smile. "We've all been there." The kindness in his voice was like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Claire found herself nodding, too stunned and grateful to protest further. Tommy completed the transaction with obvious relief, and gradually the cafe's normal rhythm resumed. "Thank you," Claire managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what happened. This has never... Really, it's okay," the man interrupted gently. Like I said, we've all been there. He started to turn away, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, but Claire couldn't let him disappear into the crowd. Something about him, his quiet dignity, the way he'd stepped forward without hesitation, the absence of judgment in his eyes, made her feel human again. "I'm Claire," she said, extending her hand. He paused, studying her face for a moment before taking her hand in his. His grip was firm, calloused, the hand of someone who worked with more than just keyboards and conference calls. "Daniel," he replied. "Daniel Carter." The name meant nothing to her, but something in his expression suggested hers meant something to him. Before she could explore that thought, he was releasing her hand and stepping back. "I hope your day gets better, Ms. Reynolds," he said. And then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd of Manhattan pedestrians, like a guardian angel returning to heaven. Claire stood frozen at the counter, holding her coffee, and wondering how a perfect stranger had just shown her more kindness than she'd received from anyone in months. It wasn't until she was back in her office that she realized he'd known her name before she'd introduced herself. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of damage control and strategic planning. Claire's assistant had fielded 17 calls from board members, 6 from investors, and 1 from a journalist at the Wall Street Journal who somehow already knew about the Morrison account. The vultures weren't just circling anymore, they were landing. Claire worked until the cleaning crew arrived, then worked some more. The city lights came alive outside her windows, a constellation of dreams and ambitions stretching to the horizon. Somewhere out there, 8 million people were living their lives, fighting their battles, chasing their own versions of success. And here she sat, 42 floors above it all, wondering if she'd forgotten how to be one of them. At nearly 11 o'clock, she finally surrendered to exhaustion. The drive home to her penthouse on the Upper East Side took 40 minutes through empty streets, her driver maintaining professional silence while she stared out at the city she'd conquered but never learned to love. Her apartment was a masterpiece of modern design, floor-to-ceiling windows, imported marble furniture that belonged in museums. It was perfect, pristine, and utterly soulless. Claire poured herself a glass of wine that cost more than most people made in a day and stood at her living room window looking down at the ant farm of humanity below. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed her mother's number and Claire let it go to voicemail. She couldn't handle Eleanor Reynolds tonight, couldn't endure another conversation about when she was going to settle down, get married, give her mother grandchildren. As if there were room in her life for anything beyond quarterly reports and hostile takeovers. The second glass of wine went down easier than the first. By the third, Claire was thinking about Daniel Carter and wondering why a security guard had $20 to spare for a stranger's coffee. She tried to picture him, those gray eyes, the careful way he'd spoken, the badge that suggested he spent his days watching other people live their lives. She fell asleep on her Italian leather couch, still wearing her suit, dreaming of coffee shops and strangers who knew her name. The next morning brought fresh challenges and old enemies. Harrison Webb was already in Claire's office when she arrived, sitting in her chair like he owned it, reading through files that weren't his business. "Harrison," Claire's voice could have frozen fire. "Did I miss an appointment?" He looked up with that infuriating smile, making no move to vacate her chair. "Claire, we need to talk." "Then talk. But get out of my chair first." He stood with exaggerated slowness, straightening his tie. "The board met last night. Emergency session." Claire felt ice form in her veins. "Without me. The discussion was about you. It would have been inappropriate." "The discussion was illegal," Claire snapped. "Board meetings require a quorum, and last I checked, I'm still CEO and chairman of this company." Harrison's smile widened. "About that, the board has some concerns, serious concerns about your leadership. The Morrison account was the last straw. They want you to take a leave of absence while they conduct a full review." "They want what?" "It's not personal, Claire. It's business. You know how these things go." She did know. She'd seen it happen to other CEOs, other companies. Death by 1,000 cuts, rumors and whispers, and carefully orchestrated character assassinations. The board would install an interim leader, probably Harrison himself, who would systematically dismantle everything she'd built. "Over my dead body," she said. "It doesn't have to be contentious. Take the leave, let us clean up the Morrison mess, and maybe we can find you a position when this is all over. Senior VP, perhaps. Still very respectable. Claire laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Senior VP of the company I built, Harrison. You must think I'm stupider than I look. His mask slipped, revealing the predator beneath. I think you're a brilliant woman who got in over her head. There's no shame in that. But this company is too important to let it sink because you're too proud to admit when you're beaten. Get out. Claire. Get out! The shout echoed through the office like a gunshot. Harrison's face darkened, but he collected his files and headed for the door. The board meets Friday at 10, he said without turning around. With or without you. When he was gone, Claire sank into her chair and put her head in her hands. 10 years of 18-hour days. 10 years of sacrificing everything for this company, and they wanted to push her out like yesterday's garbage. The worst part was that they might succeed. Harrison had connections, influenced the old boys network that had been excluding women like her since the dawn of corporate America. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Your 2 p.m. canceled, rescheduled for next week. Another rat-jumping ship. By tomorrow, the trade publications would be running stories about Reynolds Tech's leadership crisis. By Friday, she'd be fighting for her professional life with one hand tied behind her back. Claire made a decision that surprised her. Instead of working through lunch, instead of plotting strategy or making desperate phone calls, she grabbed her purse and headed for the elevator. She needed airspace perspective, and maybe another cup of coffee from the only place in the city where she still felt human. Café Luna was crowded with the lunch rush, but Maya waved her toward a small table in the corner, the one she always saved for her regular customers. Claire ordered a sandwich she wouldn't eat, and coffee she desperately needed, letting the familiar sounds of conversation and clinking dishes wash over her like a balm. She was stirring cream into her coffee when she saw him. Daniel Carter sat 3 tables away, a book open in front of him and a half-eaten sandwich forgotten on his plate. He was wearing the same uniform as yesterday, the security badge catching the afternoon light. His dark hair fell across his forehead as he read, and there was something peaceful about his concentration. Something that made Claire want to know what book could capture his attention so completely. Their eyes met across the cafe, and Daniel's expression shifted from surprise to something warmer. He closed his book. Claire caught a glimpse of the title, Something About Quantum Physics, and stood. Ms. Reynolds, he said, approaching her table with the same careful dignity she remembered. How are you feeling today? Like I've been run over by a truck, she answered honestly, surprising herself. But the coffee here is good medicine. Daniel smiled, and Claire realized it was the first genuine smile she'd seen directed at her in weeks. Maya makes the best coffee in the city. I've been coming here for 3 years and I've never had a bad cup. 3 years, Claire repeated. I've been coming here for 5. I'm surprised we haven't run into each other before. Something flickered in Daniel's eyes. A hesitation, maybe regret. I usually come in earlier. Different schedule. Claire gestured to the empty chair across from her. Would you like to sit? I promise I can pay for my own coffee today. Daniel hesitated, glancing around the cafe as if checking for something. I don't want to intrude. You're not intruding. I could use the company. He sat, but kept his posture careful, professional. Rough day at the office. Claire laughed, a sound edged with hysteria. You could say that. Sometimes I feel like I'm fighting a war where the rules keep changing and nobody told me what the new ones are. What kind of work do you do? Daniel asked, though something in his tone suggested he already knew. I run a tech company. Software development, mostly government contracts. Claire studied his face, looking for recognition. What about you? Security work must have its challenges. Daniel nodded slowly. Different kind of challenges. But honest work. There's something to be said for knowing exactly what's expected of you each day. That sounds wonderful, Claire said, and meant it. I can't remember the last time I knew what to expect from one day to the next. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the chaos of the cafe flowing around them like water around stones. Claire found herself studying Daniel's hands where they rested on the table, long fingers, calloused palms, a thin scar across his left knuckle. Working hands. Honest hands. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. Yesterday when you paid for my coffee. Why did you do that? Daniel considered the question seriously. Because you looked like someone who needed a small kindness, and because... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Because I know what it feels like to have the ground disappear from under your feet. There was pain in his voice, old and deep and carefully controlled. Claire felt an unexpected urge to reach across the table to touch his hand and offer comfort the way he'd offered it to her. Instead, she wrapped her fingers around her coffee cup and tried to understand why this stranger's kindness mattered so much. I keep thinking about something you said, she admitted. That we've all been there. But I wonder if that's true. I wonder if some of us have been there and never found our way back. Daniel's gray eyes met hers, and in them she saw understanding that went deeper than words. Sometimes finding your way back means accepting that you can't go back to where you started. Sometimes it means building something new. The weight of his words settled between them like a bridge spanning unknown waters. Claire felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the armor she'd worn for so long, she'd forgotten it wasn't part of her skin. Daniel, she began, then stopped. She wanted to ask about the pain in his voice, about the book on quantum physics, about why a security guard carried himself like a man who'd once commanded boardrooms. Instead, she asked, "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" The question surprised them both. Daniel's eyes widened, and Claire felt heat flood her cheeks. She'd just asked out a man she barely knew, a man whose last name she'd learned yesterday, a man who'd paid for her coffee when her platinum card failed. Daniel started, then stopped. That's very kind of you, Ms. Reynolds, but I don't think that would be appropriate. Why not? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. Daniel's smile was sad. Because you're you and I'm me. Because some lines shouldn't be crossed. Claire felt something deflate inside her chest. Of course. She was Claire Reynolds, CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and he was a security guard with $20 to spare for strangers. In the harsh light of reality, her invitation seemed naive at best, condescending at worst. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. You didn't, Daniel assured her, his voice gentle. I'm flattered, really, but I think it's better if we keep things simple. He stood collecting his book and his dignity. I hope your war gets easier, Ms. Reynolds. You strike me as someone who deserves to win. And then he was gone again, leaving Claire alone with her cooling coffee and the growing certainty that she'd just lost something she hadn't even known she wanted. The rest of the week passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and increasingly desperate attempts to shore up support before Friday's board meeting. Claire worked 18-hour days, called in every favor she'd ever earned, and made promises she wasn't sure she could keep. But with each passing hour, the writing on the wall became clearer. She was fighting a losing battle against an enemy that had been planning this coup for months. Thursday night found her in her office at nearly midnight, surrounded by legal documents and financial projections, preparing for what might be her last stand as CEO of Reynolds Tech. Her assistant had gone home hours ago, and the building was empty except for the security guards making their rounds. Claire was deep in a contract review when she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her office. She looked up to see a familiar figure pass by her glass wall, and her heart did something unexpected. Daniel Carter walked with the measured pace of a man on patrol, his security radio clipped to his belt, a flashlight in his hand. He moved like someone comfortable with the darkness, unafraid of empty spaces and shadows. Without thinking, Claire stood and walked to her door. "Working late?" she called softly. Daniel turned, surprise flickering across his features. "Ms. Reynolds, I didn't expect anyone to still be here." "I could say the same thing. I thought you worked days." "I pick up night shifts sometimes," he said, walking closer. "Extra money never hurts." Claire leaned against her door frame, suddenly conscious of how she must look, hair escaping its perfect style. Makeup faded the exhaustion she'd been carrying for days, written across her face like graffiti. "What about you?" Daniel asked. "It's almost midnight on a Thursday. Shouldn't you be home?" Home doesn't feel much like home these days, she admitted. Besides, I have a big meeting tomorrow. Career-defining, you might say. Daniel's expression grew concerned. Everything all right? Claire laughed a sound without humor. Remember that war I mentioned tomorrow? I find out if I win or lose. They stood in the empty hallway, the city sparkling beyond the windows, and Claire felt the strangest urge to tell this man everything about Harrison and the board, about the Morrison account, about the growing certainty that everything she'd built was about to crumble. Instead, she asked, "What's it like?" "What's what like?" "Working security, watching other people's lives instead of living your own." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not watching other people's lives," he said finally. "I'm protecting them. There's a difference." "Is that enough? Just protecting things?" His gray eyes searched her face in the dim hallway light. "Sometimes protecting something you believe in is the most important thing you can do." The words hung between them like a challenge or maybe a promise. Claire felt her pulse quicken, felt something dangerous and electric building in the space between them. "Daniel," she began. Not sure what she was going to say. "I should finish my rounds," he said quickly, stepping back. "Good luck tomorrow, Miss Reynolds. I hope you get the outcome you deserve." He disappeared into the shadows of the hallway, leaving Claire standing in her doorway, with her heart racing and her carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. She worked until dawn, but her mind kept drifting to gray eyes and gentle words, to the way Daniel had said her name like it was something precious. By the time the sun rose over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility, Claire Reynolds had made a decision that would change everything. She was going to fight, not just for her company, not just for her reputation, but for the chance to become the person she saw reflected in Daniel Carter's eyes, someone worth saving, someone worth believing, and someone who deserved more than the hollow victory of professional success. The war wasn't over. In fact, Claire thought as she gathered her papers and prepared for battle, it was just beginning, and for the first time in days, she found herself smiling. The boardroom felt like a coliseum at dawn, silent, expectant, and heavy with the promise of blood. Claire arrived 15 minutes early, her armor perfectly pressed and her war paint flawlessly applied. She'd chosen her favorite Armani suit, the one that made her feel invincible, and her grandmother's pearl earrings for luck. If she was going down, she'd go down swinging. Harrison Webb was already there, of course, holding court with Marcus Chen and two other board members whose loyalty had always been questionable. They stopped talking when she entered, their smiles as sharp as broken glass. "Claire," Harrison said, his voice dripping false warmth, "you look lovely this morning. Ready for our little chat?" "Ready as I'll ever be," she replied, taking her seat at the head of the table. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone for the next hour. This was still her company, still her kingdom, still her fight. The remaining board members filed in over the next 10 minutes. Patricia Lawson with her predatory smile, David Kim looking uncomfortable but resigned, Elizabeth Torres avoiding eye contact entirely, and finally, Thomas Wright, the oldest member of the board and the only one who'd known Claire's father. Thomas had been her strongest supporter since day one, had championed her vision when others called it impossible, had stood by her through every crisis and triumph. If she'd lost Thomas, she'd lost everything. "Good morning, everyone," Claire began, her voice steady despite the hurricane in her chest. "I understand there are concerns about recent developments. I'm here to address them." Harrison leaned back in his leather chair like a king on his throne. "Claire, we appreciate your willingness to discuss this. As you know, the Morrison account situation has raised some questions about direction and leadership." "The Morrison account was a setback," Claire acknowledged, "but hardly catastrophic. We've faced challenges before and emerged stronger." "Have we?" Marcus Chen spoke up, sliding a tablet across the table. "Because the numbers tell a different story. Stock price down 12% in the last quarter. 3 major clients requesting review meetings. And now Morrison citing leadership concerns in their rejection letter." Claire glanced at the tablet, her heart sinking. The numbers were worse than she'd thought, carefully compiled to paint a picture of systematic failure. Someone had been planning this assault for months. "Market fluctuations are normal in our industry," she said. "Amazon dropped 15% last quarter. Google lost 8%. This is hardly unique to Reynolds Tech. But Amazon and Google aren't hemorrhaging clients. Patricia interjected, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. They're not facing votes of no confidence from their own boards. The words hit like a physical blow. Claire kept her expression neutral, but inside she felt something cracking. A vote of no confidence meant they already had the numbers. This wasn't a discussion, it was an execution. I see, she said quietly, and I suppose you have a solution in mind. Harrison's smile widened. We do. A temporary leave of absence while we conduct a thorough review of company operations. Marcus has agreed to serve as interim CEO, and I'll personally oversee the transition. Of course he would. Marcus Chen, who'd been gunning for her job since the day she'd poached his best engineers. Marcus, who'd never forgiven her for being younger, smarter, and more successful than he'd ever been. How thoughtful of you both, Claire said, ice forming in her voice. Tell me, Marcus, how does it feel to finally get the promotion you've been scheming for? Marcus had the grace to look uncomfortable. Claire, this isn't personal. You know I've always respected your work. Respected it enough to steal it, apparently. That's enough, Harrison snapped. We're trying to handle this professionally. Don't make it more difficult than it needs to be. Claire looked around the table, studying the faces of people she'd trusted, people she'd made wealthy, people she'd considered friends. Elizabeth Torres was staring at her hands. David Kim looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Patricia was practically glowing with satisfaction. Only Thomas met her eyes, and what she saw there made her chest tight. Sadness, regret, but not surprise. Thomas, she said quietly, you've been silent. What's your position on this coup? The old man sighed suddenly, looking every one of his 73 years. Claire, you know how much I admired your father, how much I believe in what you've built here. But the board has a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you. The betrayal cut deeper than all the others combined. Thomas had been her mentor, her father figure, the one person she'd thought would never abandon her. His defection meant the vote was unanimous. They'd all agreed to throw her to the wolves. I see, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. So what now? I clean out my office while Marcus redecorates. The board has prepared a generous severance package, Harrison said, producing a thick folder. Full pay for 18 months, stock options retained, and a glowing reference letter. All you have to do is sign. Claire stared at the folder without touching it. 18 months of salary to disappear quietly, to let them destroy everything she'd built without putting up a fight. It was more than generous. It was a bribe. And if I don't sign, Harrison's mask slipped slightly. Then we proceed with the vote of no confidence. Either way, the outcome is the same. But this way, you leave with dignity intact. Dignity. As if there were dignity in being stabbed in the back by people she'd trusted. As if there were dignity in watching her life's work handed over to a man who'd never had an original thought in his life. Claire stood slowly, her hands flat on the table. Around her, the board members shifted uncomfortably, waiting for her surrender. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany, and for a moment she remembered the day she'd bought this table fresh out of graduate school. Convinced she could change the world. You know what the funny thing is? She said, her voice growing stronger. I actually thought you were my friends. I thought we were building something together, something that mattered. I thought loyalty meant something in this business. Claire, Thomas started. No. She cut him off. I'm talking now. For 10 years, I've given this company everything. 18-hour days, missed vacations, relationships sacrificed on the altar of quarterly reports. I've made every one of you wealthy beyond your wildest dreams, and this is how you repay me. She walked to the windows, looking down at the city spread below like a circuit board come to life. Somewhere down there, Daniel Carter was making his rounds, protecting things that mattered. Somewhere down there, Maya was serving coffee to people who needed small kindnesses. Somewhere down there, life was happening in ways that had nothing to do with stock prices and board meetings. You want to know what leadership is? Claire turned back to face them. Leadership isn't playing it safe. It isn't avoiding risks or keeping shareholders happy at all costs. Leadership is having the courage to fail while reaching for something better. Pretty words, Harrison said. But words don't pay dividends. No, Claire agreed. But they build legacies, something you'll never understand. She walked back to the table and picked up the severance folder, weighing it in her hands like a weapon. Then, with deliberate precision, she tore it in half. "I won't make this easy for you," she said, dropping the pieces on the table. "You want me gone? You'll have to vote me out. And I'll make damn sure every tech journalist in the city knows exactly how you did it." Harrison's face went red. "You're making a mistake, Claire. A very expensive mistake." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." She walked toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. "One more thing. When this company crashes and burns under Marcus's leadership, and it will, don't come crying to me. You made your choice. Live with it." The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like thunder. Claire made it to her office before the shaking started. She collapsed into her chair, her carefully constructed composure crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. The magnitude of what had just happened hit her in waves. She was finished, done, professionally dead in the water. By close of business, Marcus Chen would be sitting in her chair and she'd be packing boxes like a terminated secretary. Her phone was already ringing. Harrison probably calling to deliver ultimatums. Or maybe a journalist who'd gotten wind of the drama. Claire let it go to voicemail, then powered it off entirely. She couldn't handle the vultures yet. A soft knock on her door made her look up. Margaret, her assistant, stood in the doorway with tears in her eyes and a cup of coffee in her hands. "I heard," Margaret said, simply setting the coffee on Claire's desk. "I'm so sorry." "They moved fast," Claire said, accepting the coffee like a lifeline. "I'll bet security will be here within the hour to escort me out." "Actually, that's why I'm here." Margaret glanced over her shoulder, then closed the door behind her. "I have something to tell you. Something about the Morrison account." Claire looked up sharply. "What about it?" Margaret wrung her hands nervously. "I wasn't supposed to know this, but I overheard Harrison on a call 2 weeks ago. He was talking to someone at Morrison Industries, telling them things about our proposal before we even submitted it." The words hit Claire like a physical blow. "What kind of things?" "Technical details. Pricing structures. He knew everything, Claire. Everything we'd worked on for months. Sabotage. Harrison hadn't just orchestrated a coup, he'd sabotaged the Morrison deal to justify it." Claire felt rage building in her chest, hot and righteous and dangerous. "Do you have proof?" she asked. Margaret shook her head. "Just what I heard. But Claire, there's more. Yesterday, I saw Marcus coming out of Harrison's office with a box of files. Our files, including the Hartfield proposal." The Hartfield proposal. Claire's secret weapon, the presentation that was supposed to save her company. If Marcus had seen it, if he knew her strategy. "Margaret," Claire said slowly, "I need you to do something for me. Something that could get you in trouble. Anything. I need you to get me copies of whatever files Marcus took, and I need you to do it without anyone knowing." Margaret nodded without hesitation. "Consider it done. But Claire, what are you going to do?" Claire stood pacing to the windows that had been her kingdom for so long. The city spread out before her, 8 million people living their lives, fighting their battles, refusing to give up when the odds seemed impossible. "I'm going to fight," she said. "Not just for my job, but for the truth. They want to play dirty, fine. Let's see how they like a real war." Margaret smiled, the first genuine smile Claire had seen all morning. "Good, because this company needs you and everyone knows it except the people in that boardroom." After Margaret left, Claire sat alone with her thoughts and her coffee, planning her next move. She couldn't beat them at their own game. They had the votes, the power, the connections. But she could expose them. She could make sure the truth came out, even if it destroyed her in the process. Her computer chimed with an email from building security. "Please remain in your office until further notice. Security personnel will escort you to collect personal items at 2 p.m. 2 o'clock. That gave her 3 hours to gather evidence, make calls, and prepare for the fight of her life. Claire cracked her knuckles and got to work. The elevator descended in silence, carrying Claire toward an uncertain future. It was 2:15 p.m., and true to their word, security had arrived to escort her from the building. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was being thrown out of her own company by people whose salaries she'd signed for years. But the security guard walking beside her wasn't one of the usual faces. This one was familiar in a way that made her heart skip. "Ms. Reynolds," Daniel Carter said quietly as they reached the ground floor. "I'm sorry it has to be this way." Claire stopped walking, staring at him in shock. "You work here in my building." "Part-time contract," he said, his gray eyes unreadable. "I pick up shifts here and there." Of course. The pieces were falling into place now, how he'd known her name that first day, how he'd seemed familiar with her schedule, how he'd been making rounds Thursday night when she'd seen him in the hallway. "How long?" she asked. 6 months, Daniel admitted. "But I swear I never reported back to Harrison about my schedule. Never listened in on my phone calls." "It's not like that," Daniel said, hurt flashing in his eyes. "I would never. Wouldn't you?" Claire's voice was bitter. God, I'm such an idiot. The coffee, the kindness, the philosophical conversations about protecting things that matter. Was any of it real? All of it was real, Daniel said fiercely. Everything I said to you, everything I felt. Claire laughed harshly. What exactly did you feel? Daniel, pity, amusement. Did you and Harrison have a good laugh about the lonely CEO who was so desperate for human connection she'd fall for a security guard? Stop, Daniel said, his voice sharp. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Let me guess. Harrison hired you to keep an eye on me. Maybe get close to me, gain my trust, report back on my state of mind. Very thorough of him. Daniel's face went pale. That's not what happened. Isn't it? Claire stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like everyone I trusted has been lying to me. My board, my friends, and now the man who paid for my coffee when my card was declined. Your card wasn't declined because of a technical error, Daniel said suddenly. Claire froze. What so? Your credit was suspended, temporarily. Harrison called in a favor at the bank, had them flag your account for 24 hours. He wanted to see how you'd handle being publicly humiliated. The words hit her like a slap. The coffee shop, the embarrassment, the moment when she'd felt most vulnerable, it had all been orchestrated. Harrison had turned her lowest moment into theater for his amusement. And you knew this, she said, her voice deadly quiet. I found out after, Daniel said quickly. I swear I didn't know when it happened. If you had what? You would have warned me, stopped him, or would you have just done your job and watched it happen? Daniel flinched as if she'd struck him. You have every right to be angry, but please don't think that what happened between us was part of some plan. What I felt, what I feel for you is real. What you feel, Claire repeated mockingly. And what exactly is that, Daniel? Because I'm having trouble telling the difference between kindness and manipulation. Before he could answer, the elevator doors opened again, disgorging Harrison Webb and Marcus Chen. They walked toward the security desk with the confident stride of conquerors, and Claire felt her rage crystallize into something cold and sharp. Claire, Harrison called out, his voice carrying false concern. I hope there were no issues with the transition. None at all, she replied sweetly. Though I am curious about one thing. How did you know my credit card would be declined at the coffee shop? Harrison's step faltered almost imperceptibly. I'm sorry. Last week, Café Luna. My card was mysteriously declined and I was publicly humiliated. Funny how these technical glitches happen right when you need ammunition for a hostile takeover. I have no idea what you're talking about, Harrison said, but his eyes had gone flat and cold. Don't you? Claire looked pointedly at Daniel, who was standing frozen beside the security desk. Because someone seems to think you orchestrated the whole thing, made some calls, pulled some strings, turned my private moment into public spectacle. Harrison followed her gaze to Daniel and something ugly crossed his face. I see you've been talking to our security staff. How indiscreet of them. Actually, Claire said, her voice growing stronger, I think it shows excellent judgment. Someone around here still cares about the truth. She turned to Daniel, studying his face in the harsh lobby lighting. He looked stricken, caught between loyalty and conscience, and for a moment she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Tell me something, Daniel," she said. "When you paid for my coffee that day, was it kindness or guilt?" "Kindness," he said immediately. "Whatever else you think about me, that was real. And the dinner invitation I made, the conversations we had, was I just another assignment?" "No." His voice was fierce, desperate. "God, no. You have to believe me, Claire. I never wanted any of this to happen." Harrison stepped forward, his patience clearly exhausted. "This is all very touching, but we have work to do. Carter, escort Ms. Reynolds to her car. Make sure she leaves the premises." "No," Daniel said quietly. Everyone froze. Harrison's face went red. "Excuse me, I said no." Daniel looked at Claire, something shifting in his expression. "I quit." He unclipped his security badge and dropped it on the desk with a metallic clatter that echoed through the lobby like a gunshot. "You can escort yourself out, Harrison," Daniel said, "and take Marcus with you. This lady is leaving with her dignity intact." Harrison's face was purple now. "You're making a very serious mistake, Carter. A career-ending mistake." Daniel smiled, and for the first time since she'd known him, Claire saw steel in his gray eyes. "My career ended 3 years ago. This was just a job." He turned to Claire, extending his arm like a gentleman from another era. "Ms. Reynolds, may I walk you to your car?" Claire stared at him, her emotions a tangled mess of anger, hurt, and something that might have been hope. Everyone in the lobby was watching Harrison Marcus, the receptionist, a handful of employees who'd gathered to witness her exile. She could reject his offer, walk out alone with her head high and her heart closed. She could make a scene, say something cutting and cruel that would put him in his place. She could do a dozen things that would feel satisfying in the moment and poisonous forever after. Instead, she placed her hand on his arm. "Thank you," she said simply. They walked through the lobby together, past the gawking employees, and the furious executives, past the marble walls and the corporate art that had once meant so much to her. The autumn air hit them like a blessing as they stepped onto the sidewalk, and Claire felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the strange lightness of having nothing left to lose. "My car is around the corner," she said, not sure why she was prolonging this conversation. "I know," Daniel said. "I've seen you leave every night for 6 months." They walked in silence through the bustling streets of Manhattan, two people caught in the eye of a storm that had destroyed everything they thought they knew about their lives. When they reached her car, Claire turned to face him, studying his features in the golden afternoon light. "Why did you quit?" she asked. "It was just a job, right? You said so yourself." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, watching taxis stream past like schools of yellow fish. "Because some things matter more than a paycheck. Because I've watched you fight for this company, seen how much it means to you, and I couldn't be part of taking it away. Even though you barely know me." "I know enough," he said softly. "I know you care about your employees more than your stock price. I know you work 18-hour days because you believe in what you're building. I know you drink your coffee black, and you tip Maya 20% every time, and you remember the names of people who everyone else ignores." Claire felt tears prick her eyes. "You notice things." "I notice you," Daniel said, "and I know that what happened to you in there was wrong." They stood on the sidewalk as the city flowed around them. Two people whose lives had just been turned upside down, finding something like comfort in their shared displacement. "I don't know what happens now," Claire admitted. "I've never been fired before, never been betrayed like this. I don't even know where to start." "Maybe you start by not giving up," Daniel said. "Maybe you start by remembering that the people who tried to destroy you are cowards who couldn't beat you fair and square. And then what, I'm one person against a board of directors with unlimited resources and no conscience. David versus Goliath doesn't work so well when Goliath has lawyers." Daniel smiled, and Claire felt her heart do something complicated. David had something Goliath didn't. What? He was fighting for something that mattered, and he was too stubborn to know when he was beaten. Claire found herself smiling back despite everything. "Are you calling me stubborn? I'm calling you a fighter. The question is, are you done fighting?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Claire thought about the last 10 years, about the company she'd built from nothing, about the employees who depended on her vision and the clients who trusted her judgment. She thought about Harrison's smug smile and Marcus's ambition and the way they'd carved up her life's work like vultures at a feast. "No," she said quietly. "I'm not done fighting." "Good," Daniel said, "because I think you're going to win." "What makes you so sure?" "Because you're Claire Reynolds," he said simply, "and you're a lot stronger than they think you are." Claire felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something that might have been hope or might have been something more dangerous. She looked at Daniel Carter, unemployed security guard, quantum physics reader, coffee buyer, man of mysteries, and made a decision that would have shocked her 12 hours ago. "Would you like to get that dinner?" she asked. "I mean, we're both unemployed now. We might as well be unemployed together." Daniel's smile was brighter than the October sun. "I'd like that very much." "Good," Claire said, surprising herself with her own boldness, "because I have a feeling I'm going to need all the allies I can get." She got into her car, and as she drove away, she watched Daniel in her rearview mirror until he disappeared into the crowd. For the first time in her adult life, Claire Reynolds had no idea what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in years, she found herself looking forward to finding out. The war wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. But she wasn't fighting alone anymore, and that made all the difference in the world. That evening, Claire sat in her empty penthouse surrounded by the monuments to her success awards, photographs, expensive art that meant nothing without someone to share it with. She'd ordered Chinese takeout for the first time in 5 years, and the containers sat open on her Italian marble coffee table like a small rebellion against everything her life had become. Her phone had been ringing all afternoon. Reporters wanting statements, headhunters smelling blood in the water, former colleagues offering hollow sympathy and calculating their own advantages. She'd ignored them all, preferring the silence of her own thoughts to the cacophony of other people's agendas. The takeout was getting cold, but Claire couldn't bring herself to eat. Instead, she found herself thinking about Daniel's eyes when he'd dropped his security badge, about the steel in his voice when he'd told Harrison to escort himself out. He'd thrown away his job for her, for someone he barely knew, someone who'd accused him of betrayal not 5 minutes earlier. She was still thinking about him when her doorbell rang. Claire wasn't expecting anyone. Her social circle had evaporated the moment news of her ouster hit the trade publications, and delivery drivers never made it past the lobby without calling first. She approached the door, cautiously checking the security monitor. Daniel Carter stood in her hallway, holding a bag from Maya's café, and looking uncertain but determined. Claire opened the door, surprise and something warmer flooding through her. "How did you get past security?" "I told them I was delivering dinner to the lady who got fired today," Daniel said with a slight smile. "Turns out building security has a soft spot for the underdog. And they just let you up." "I can be persuasive when I need to be." He held up the bag. "I brought soup. Figured you might not feel much like cooking tonight." Claire stepped aside, gesturing him into her apartment. She watched his eyes widen as he took in the space, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the museum-quality furniture, the art that cost more than most people's cars. "This is..." He started, then stopped. "Excessive," Claire suggested. "Pretentious, cold as a mausoleum." "I was going to say beautiful," Daniel said quietly. "But lonely." The word hit her like a physical blow. Lonely. Yes, that's exactly what this place was. For all its perfection, its careful design, its breathtaking views, it was the loneliest place on earth. "I never thought about it that way," she said, leading him to the living room. "I guess I was too busy being impressed with myself to notice." Daniel set the soup on her coffee table next to the forgotten Chinese containers. "Maya insisted on sending chamomile tea too, said you looked like someone who needed to sleep." "Maya notices things too." "It's a gift," Daniel agreed. "She sees people, really sees them. Not many people do that anymore." They sat on opposite ends of her ridiculous white couch, the city sprawling below them like a glittering circuit board. Claire opened the soup container, chicken noodle, the kind of comfort food she hadn't eaten since childhood, and felt something ease in her chest. "This is good," she said after the first spoonful. "Really good." "Maya makes everything with love," Daniel said. "She told me once that food tastes better when the person making it cares about the person eating it." Claire looked at him over her spoon. "Is that what this is? Caring?" Daniel met her gaze steadily. "Yes. Despite what you might think about my motives, despite everything that happened today, yes, I care about you." "Why?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended. "You don't really know me, not the real me." "Don't I?" Daniel shifted on the couch, turning to face her fully. "I know you tip Maya 20% because you know she's putting 2 kids through college. I know you remember Tommy's name even though he's just the barista. I know you work late every night because you care about doing things right, not because you're avoiding going home." Claire felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Those are just details." "Details matter," Daniel said. "They're what make you human, what make you real." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the soup warming Claire from the inside out. Through the windows, the city pulsed with life, millions of people living their lives, falling in love, fighting battles, starting over. For the first time in years, Claire felt connected to that pulse, instead of floating above it. "Can I ask you something?" she said eventually. "Anything. Earlier when you said your career ended 3 years ago, what did you mean?" Daniel's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. For a moment, Claire thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set the spoon down and looked out at the city lights. "I used to be an engineer," he said quietly. "Software development, AI research. I worked for Google for 8 years, had a team of 12 brilliant people, was on track to make senior director before I turned 40. Claire felt something shift in her understanding of him. What happened? Life happened. Daniel's voice was distant, as if he were talking about someone else's story. "I was married to an amazing woman named Sarah. We had 2 kids. Emma was 7, Jake was 5. Perfect life, perfect family, perfect future, all mapped out." The past tense hit Claire like a cold wind. "Was car accident," Daniel said simply. "Drunk driver ran a red light. Sarah and Emma were killed instantly. Jake survived, but he was in the hospital for 3 months. Brain injury, broken bones, psychological trauma." Claire's soup went cold in her hands. "Daniel, I'm so sorry." "I quit my job to take care of him," Daniel continued, his voice steady but hollow. "Sold the house, liquidated everything, moved us into a small apartment near the children's hospital. Spent 2 years in rehabilitation therapy specialists. Jake needed me, and nothing else mattered." "How is he now?" For the first time since he'd started talking, Daniel smiled. "He's incredible. 11 years old, brilliant as hell, stubborn as his mother. He goes to school, plays soccer, argues with me about bedtime. Sometimes I look at him and can't believe we made it through." "But you never went back to engineering?" Daniel shrugged. "By the time Jake was stable enough for me to think about working again, I'd been out of the field for 3 years. Technology moves fast, my skills were outdated, my contacts had moved on, and frankly, I wasn't sure I wanted that life anymore." "So you became a security guard?" "I became a lot of things. Security guard night, janitor, delivery driver, whatever would pay the bills and let me be home when Jake needed me. It's honest work and it keeps food on the table." Claire stared at him, seeing him completely for the first time. This wasn't just a security guard who'd been kind to her. This was a man who'd sacrificed everything for his son, who'd given up a brilliant career to become a caregiver, who'd rebuilt his entire life from the ground up after losing everything that mattered. "You're incredible," she said softly. Daniel looked surprised. "I'm not. I'm just a father doing what fathers do." "No," Claire said firmly. "You're a man who chose love over ambition, who put your child's needs before your own career, who survived the worst thing that can happen to a person and came out the other side still capable of kindness." "Claire, I mean it," she interrupted. "I've spent the last 10 years thinking success meant corner offices and board meetings and seeing my name in Fortune magazine. But you redefined success entirely. You made it about something that actually matters." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the soft lamplight. "Is that what you think? That you've wasted the last 10 years? Haven't I?" Claire gestured around her sterile apartment. "Look at this place. Look at my life. I have everything and nothing. I built an empire and forgot to build a home." "You built something that matters," Daniel said. "Reynolds Tech employs 300 people. That's 300 families who have health insurance because of you. 300 people who can pay their mortgages, send their kids to college, plan for retirement. Harrison will destroy all of that. Maybe. Or maybe he'll fail spectacularly and give you the chance to build something even better." Claire looked at him sharply. "You really think I should fight this?" "I think you should do whatever feels right to you," Daniel said. "But I also think the world needs more people like you, people who take risks, who push boundaries, who refuse to accept that good enough is actually good enough." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the day settling between them like dust. Claire found herself studying Daniel's profile as he looked out at the city, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the calm intelligence in his gray eyes. He was nothing like the men she usually dated, nothing like the ambitious, driven, ruthlessly successful types who'd populated her social circle. He was better. "Daniel," she said quietly. "Yeah, thank you. For the soup, for quitting your job, for telling me about your family, for seeing me when everyone else was looking through me." He turned to meet her eyes, and Claire felt something electric pass between them. "Thank you for letting me see you." The moment stretched fragile and full of possibility. Claire found herself leaning slightly forward, drawn by something she didn't quite understand, but didn't want to resist. Daniel's eyes dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, a question in their gray depths. Before either of them could move, Claire's phone rang, shattering the spell. She glanced at the display and groaned. "I should probably take this," she said reluctantly. "It's my assistant." "Of course," Daniel said, settling back into the couch. Claire answered the call, trying to ignore the way her heart was still racing. "Hi, Margaret." "Claire, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all afternoon. I have those files you wanted, but there's something else. Something big." "What kind of something?" "I stayed late to copy the files from Marcus's office, and I overheard a call he was making. Claire, they're planning to sell Reynolds Tech to Tecton Solutions." The words hit Claire like a physical blow. Tecton Solutions, their biggest competitor, the company that had swooped in to steal the Morrison account. Harrison wasn't just removing her from power, he was selling her company to her enemies. "Are you sure?" Claire asked, her voice deadly quiet. "Positive. Marcus was talking to their CEO about integration timelines and staff reductions." "Claire, they're planning to fire half our people and absorb the rest." 300 families. 300 people who trusted her, who'd built their careers at Reynolds Tech, who would be sacrificed on the altar of Harrison's greed. "Email me everything," Claire said, her voice growing stronger. "Every file, every document, every scrap of evidence you can find. And Margaret, be careful. If they figure out what you're doing—" "I know," Margaret said, "but this is bigger than my job. This is about doing what's right." Claire hung up and looked at Daniel, who was watching her with concern. "Bad news?" he asked. "The worst," Claire said. "They're not just stealing my company, they're destroying it." She told him what Margaret had discovered, watched his expression grow darker with each detail. When she finished, Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "So, what are you going to do?" he asked finally. Claire stood and walked to the windows, looking down at the city that had been her battlefield for the last 10 years. Somewhere out there, Harrison Webb was probably celebrating his victory with expensive whiskey and cigars. Somewhere out there, Marcus Chen was planning the dismantling of everything she'd built. Somewhere out there, 300 people were going to bed thinking their jobs were secure. "I'm going to stop them," she said, her reflection fierce in the glass. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'm going to stop them." "How?" Claire turned back to Daniel, feeling something crystallize in her chest, something hard and bright and unbreakable. "By being smarter than they are," she said. "By fighting dirtier than they ever expected. By remembering that I didn't build this company, by playing it safe." Daniel smiled, and Claire felt her heart do that complicated thing again. Need any help? He asked. Are you offering? I'm unemployed. Remember, I've got nothing but time. Claire looked at this man who'd just told her his deepest pain, who'd sacrificed his career for hers, who was sitting in her sterile apartment eating soup and offering to help her fight a war she couldn't possibly win. Yes, she said. I could use the help. Good, Daniel said, standing and moving toward her, because I have some ideas about quantum computing applications that might interest you. Claire blinked. Quantum computing. Did I mention I used to work in AI research? Daniel's smile was wicked. Because I think it's time Harrison Webb learned what happens when you underestimate your opponents. Standing there in her empty apartment, surrounded by the monuments to her old life, Claire Reynolds felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of a new beginning. The war wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. And this time, she wasn't fighting alone. The morning light filtered through Claire's floor-to-ceiling windows like liquid gold, painting the city in shades of possibility. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with plans and contingencies, but for the first time in weeks, the insomnia felt productive rather than destructive. Beside her on the coffee table, Daniel's notebook lay open, filled with diagrams and equations that looked like poetry written in mathematics. He'd stayed until nearly 3 in the morning, the two of them hunched over laptops and legal pads, mapping out a strategy that was equal parts brilliant and audacious. Claire had watched him transform before her eyes, the quiet security guard disappearing, to reveal the genius engineer beneath his fingers, flying across keyboards as he outlined quantum algorithms that could revolutionize data processing. Now at 7 a.m., she stood at her windows, with a cup of coffee that actually tasted good for once, watching the city wake up below. Somewhere out there, Harrison Webb was probably having breakfast in his Park Avenue penthouse, convinced he'd won. Somewhere out there, Marcus Chen was settling into her office, rearranging her furniture to suit his mediocre ambitions. They had no idea what was coming. Claire's phone buzzed with a text from Daniel Coffee Shop at 8. Need to show you something. She smiled, feeling something warm unfurl in her chest. In 12 hours, Daniel Carter had gone from stranger to ally to something she couldn't quite name but didn't want to examine too closely. There would be time for feelings later after the war was won. An hour later, Claire pushed through the doors of Café Luna to find Daniel already there, a laptop open in front of him and a stack of papers covered in his precise handwriting. He looked up when she entered, and his smile sent electricity down her spine. You look like someone who's ready to change the world, he said, standing to pull out her chair. I look like someone who's had 3 hours of sleep and enough caffeine to power a small city, Claire corrected, but she was smiling too. What did you want to show me? Daniel turned his laptop screen toward her, and Claire's breath caught. The display showed a complex flowchart of interconnected systems, data streams flowing like rivers through quantum processing nodes. This is a complete redesign of Reynolds Tech's core architecture, Daniel explained, his voice taking on the passion of a man discussing his life's work. Quantum-enhanced AI processing that could handle government contracts 10 times more complex than anything currently possible. Claire leaned forward, studying the diagrams with growing excitement. This is incredible, but the computing power required already exists, Daniel interrupted, opening another window. Google's been developing quantum processors for civilian applications. IBM has quantum cloud services. The technology is there. It just needs someone with the vision to implement it properly. Someone like us. Someone exactly like us. Daniel's eyes were bright with possibility. Claire, what if losing Reynolds Tech isn't the end? What if it's the beginning of something bigger? Before Claire could respond, a familiar voice cut through the cafe's morning chatter. Well, well, if it isn't the fallen queen and her loyal knight. Claire turned to see Patricia Lawson approaching their table, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. The former board member was perfectly dressed, as always, her designer suit impeccable and her makeup flawless. But there was something predatory in her eyes that made Claire's skin crawl. Patricia, Claire said evenly, shouldn't you be busy helping Harrison dismantle my company? Oh, darling, that's already done, Patricia replied, uninvited, sliding into an empty chair. We finalized the Tecton deal this morning. Very lucrative for all involved. The words hit like a physical blow, but Claire kept her expression neutral. Congratulations. I'm sure you'll sleep well knowing you've destroyed 300 jobs for a quick profit. 300 jobs that will be replaced by more efficient operations, Patricia countered. Really, Claire, you always were too sentimental for business. Companies evolve or they die. It's simply natural selection. Daniel had been silent through this exchange, but now he spoke, his voice quiet and dangerous. And what about loyalty? Does that evolve too, or does it just die? Patricia's gaze shifted to Daniel, and her smile became even more unpleasant. Ah, yes, the security guard. How democratic of you, Claire. Though I suppose, when one falls from grace, one must adjust one's standards accordingly. Be very careful, Claire said, ice forming in her voice. You're talking about a man worth 10 of you. A man who was spying on you for months, Patricia shot back. Really? Claire, didn't you wonder how Harrison always seemed to know your schedule, your meetings, your strategies? Claire felt Daniel stiffen beside her, but she didn't look at him. She couldn't. Not when Patricia's words were confirming her darkest suspicions. You see, Patricia continued, clearly enjoying herself. Harrison is very thorough in his planning. When we decided you'd become a liability, we needed intelligence. And what better source than a security guard with access to your floor? That's enough, Daniel said, his voice low and furious. Is it? Patricia's laugh was like breaking crystal. Tell me, Mr. Carter, how much did Harrison pay you to get close to our dear Claire, to gain her trust, to report back on her state of mind? Claire's world tilted on its axis. She looked at Daniel, searching his face for denial, for outrage, for anything that would prove Patricia wrong. Instead, she saw guilt and pain and something that looked like desperation. Claire. Daniel started reaching for her hand. She pulled away as if his touch burned. Is it true? The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Around them, the café continued its morning rhythm. Coffee brewing conversations, flowing lives moving forward while hers crumbled again. Yes, Daniel said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. But not the way she's making it sound. Patricia clapped her hands together in mock delight. Oh, this is even better than I hoped. You actually developed feelings for her, didn't you? How deliciously messy. Claire stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need some air. She walked quickly toward the door, Daniel's voice calling her name behind her. The morning air hit her like a slap, sharp and cold and mercilessly clear. She'd been played again, manipulated again, betrayed again. When would she learn that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford? Claire, wait. Daniel caught up with her on the sidewalk, his face pale and desperate. Let me explain. Explain what? Claire whirled to face him, her composure finally cracking. Explain how you lied to me from the very beginning. How everything, the coffee, the conversations, the quantum computing plans, was all part of some elaborate It wasn't like that, Daniel said fiercely. Yes, Harrison approached me. Yes, he offered me money to keep an eye on you, but I never took it, Claire, not one penny. Then why? Because I needed the job, Daniel interrupted, running his hands through his hair. Because I have a son who needs medical insurance and a roof over his head. Because security work at a high-end building pays better than anywhere else I could get hired. Claire stared at him, her heart breaking and rebuilding and breaking again. So you did spy on me. I watched you, Daniel admitted. That was part of the job description. But I never reported back to Harrison. I never told him anything about your schedule or your meetings or your state of mind. How do I know that? How do I know anything you've told me is true? Daniel's face crumpled. Because I'm telling you now. Because I quit my job rather than be part of what they did to you. Because I spent last night helping you plan their destruction instead of calling Harrison with intelligence. A taxi honked loudly as it swerved around a double-parked delivery truck, and the sound made them both jump. Claire realized they were standing in the middle of a busy sidewalk, their private drama playing out for anyone who cared to watch. I can't do this, she said, stepping toward the curb. I can't think straight right now. Claire, please. Daniel caught her arm gently, his touch careful and desperate. I know you have every reason not to trust me, but look at what we built last night. Look at those plans, those possibilities. That's real. Whatever else you think about me, that's real. She looked into his gray eyes and saw pain that matched her own hope warring with despair. Love fighting against the weight of deception. For a moment, she wavered, caught between the woman who'd learned to trust no one and the woman who'd found something precious in this man's quiet strength. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to think." Daniel nodded, releasing her arm. "I understand. But Claire, whatever you decide about me, don't let them win. Don't let Harrison and Patricia and all the rest of them convince you that you're finished. You're better than they are, and you deserve better than what they've done to you." A taxi pulled up to the curb, and Claire got in without looking back. As the car pulled away, she saw Daniel standing on the sidewalk in her side mirror, his hands in his pockets and his shoulders slumped in defeat. The taxi carried her through the streets of Manhattan, past the building that had been her kingdom, past the restaurants where she'd celebrated victories and the bars where she'd drowned defeats. The city looked different somehow, smaller, less impressive, more human. Maybe it was losing everything that gave her perspective, or maybe it was Daniel's influence showing her how to see beyond the surface. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked, catching her eye in the rearview mirror. Claire realized she had no idea. Her old life was gone. Her apartment felt like a mausoleum, and the only person who'd offered her hope might have been lying to her from the beginning. "Central Park," she said finally. "The reservoir." 20 minutes later, Claire stood at the railing overlooking the Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis Reservoir, watching joggers circle the water like pilgrims in Lycra. The autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of winter. She'd always loved this view, the way the city's skyline reflected in the still water, the illusion that Manhattan was floating rather than anchored to bedrock. Her phone had been buzzing constantly, reporters, investors, former colleagues sensing blood in the water. She'd turned it off 20 minutes ago, choosing silence over sympathy. But as she stood at the railing, watching the sun climb higher into a cloudless sky, Claire found her thoughts drifting back to Daniel's laptop screen and the revolutionary architecture he'd designed. Quantum-enhanced AI processing. It was ambitious to the point of insanity, requiring resources she no longer had, and expertise that existed in maybe a dozen minds worldwide. But it was also brilliant, the kind of breakthrough that could reshape entire industries, the kind of innovation that made careers and changed lives. "Excuse me, miss. Are you Claire Reynolds?" Claire turned to find a young woman approaching early 20s, dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing jeans and a Syracuse University sweatshirt that had seen better days. "Depends who's asking," Claire replied carefully. "I'm Jenny Martinez," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm a computer science graduate student at Columbia. I've been following your work for years. I wanted to say I'm sorry about what happened to you." Claire shook the offered hand, surprised by the genuine concern in the young woman's eyes. "Thank you. That's very kind." "It's not kind, it's justice," Jenny said fiercely. "What they did to you was wrong. Reynolds Tech was the most innovative company in the sector, and now it's going to be absorbed by Tecton and turned into another generic consulting firm." "You seem to know a lot about the situation." "I've been following the tech news obsessively. I'm writing my thesis on quantum applications in AI systems, and your company was doing some of the most cutting-edge work in the field." Jenny paused, studying Claire's face. "I don't suppose you're planning a comeback?" Claire found herself smiling for the first time since Patricia's ambush. "What makes you think I'm planning anything?" "Because you're Claire Reynolds," Jenny said simply. "Because you don't strike me as someone who goes down without a fight. And because the industry needs people like you, people who push boundaries instead of just protecting profit margins." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the joggers and the dog walkers and the tourists with their cameras. Jenny reminded Claire of herself at that age, hungry, idealistic, convinced she could change the world through sheer force of will. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said. "Of course. If you could design the perfect tech company from scratch, unlimited resources, no corporate politics, complete freedom to innovate, what would you build?" Jenny's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Quantum computing integrated with machine learning algorithms that could process data in ways we've never imagined. Real-time analysis of complex systems, predictive modeling that could anticipate problems before they happen, AI that doesn't just respond to queries, but actually thinks ahead. That's a pretty ambitious vision. So was the internet, Jenny countered. So was the smartphone. So was cloud computing. Every revolutionary technology started with someone who was willing to be ambitious. Claire studied the young woman's face, seeing herself in Jenny's passionate intensity. Would you be interested in helping build something like that? Are you offering me a job at a company that doesn't exist? I'm offering you a chance to help create a company that could exist, if you're brave enough to take the risk. Jenny didn't hesitate. Where do I sign? Claire laughed, feeling something shift inside her chest. First, we need to figure out exactly what we're building, and that means I need to have a conversation with someone I'm not sure I can trust. Complicated situation. The most complicated, Claire admitted. But maybe that's what makes it worth doing. They exchanged numbers, and as Jenny walked away toward the university district, Claire found herself thinking about Daniel's plans again. Revolutionary technology required revolutionary thinking, and revolutionary thinking required trust, the willingness to believe in something beyond proven facts and guaranteed outcomes. She turned her phone back on and found 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. But the one that caught her attention was from an unknown number. I'm at Jake's soccer practice. Field 3 in Riverside Park. If you want to see who I really am, come find me. Daniel Claire stared at the message for a long moment, then hailed another taxi. Riverside Park was alive with the sounds of childhood laughter and shouting and the thud of soccer balls against feet. Claire found Field 3 easily enough following the noise and the crowd of parents with folding chairs and coffee cups. She spotted Daniel immediately standing on the sideline with his hands cupped around his mouth, cheering for a boy in a blue jersey who was racing down the field with single-minded determination. "That's it, Jake," Daniel shouted. "Use your left foot. You've got this." The boy. Jake took the advice, switched feet, and scored a goal that sent his team into celebration mode. Daniel's face lit up with pride so pure it took Claire's breath away. This wasn't the careful security guard or the brilliant engineer she'd known. This was a father watching his son triumph, and the love in his expression was so naked and honest that Claire felt like she was witnessing something sacred. She approached quietly, not wanting to interrupt the moment, but Daniel seemed to sense her presence turning as she drew near. "You came," he said, surprise and hope warring in his voice. "You invited me to see who you really are," Claire replied. "I'm still trying to figure out if I can trust what I see." "Fair enough." Daniel gestured toward the field where Jake was celebrating with his teammates. "That's my son. Everything I do, every choice I make, every job I take, it's all for him." Claire watched the boy Daniel's son and saw echoes of his father in the determined set of his jaw, the way he encouraged his teammates, the careful way he celebrated without showboating. "He looks like you," she said. "He acts like his mother," Daniel replied softly. "Thank God. She was the best person I've ever known." The game resumed, and they stood in comfortable silence, watching 11-year-olds chase a soccer ball with the intensity of World Cup players. Around them, other parents cheered and groaned and lived and died with every play. And Claire found herself thinking about what it would be like to care about something so simple and immediate. "Daniel," she said during a break in the action, "tell me about Harrison's offer, all of it." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away from the field. "He approached me 3 months ago, said he was concerned about your mental state, your decision-making abilities. He wanted someone on the inside who could observe and report back. And you said yes." "I said I'd think about it," Daniel corrected. The money he was offering would have covered Jake's medical insurance for 2 years, his therapy, his medications, all of it. Claire felt her heart constrict. "But you didn't take it." "I took the security job," Daniel said. "But I never reported back to Harrison. I watched you. Yes, that was part of the job description. But everything I saw just convinced me that Harrison was wrong about you." "What did you see?" Daniel turned to look at her fully, his gray eyes serious. "I saw someone who cared more about her employees than her stock price. Someone who worked 18-hour days not because she was obsessed with power, but because she believed in what she was building. Someone who remembered the names of people everyone else ignored. Those are just details." Details that revealed character, Daniel said. Details that made me realize Harrison wasn't trying to protect the company, he was trying to steal it. On the field, Jake scored another goal and Daniel's face lit up again. Claire watched him cheer for his son and felt something settle into place in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Because I was ashamed," Daniel admitted. "Because I'd considered betraying you for money, even if I never actually did it. Because I thought if you knew the truth, you'd never trust me. And now I'm hoping that honesty counts for something. That the fact that I chose you over Harrison's money, chose truth over convenience, means something to you." The game ended with Jake's team winning 3-1, and Claire watched as Daniel's son ran toward them, grass-stained and grinning and absolutely radiant with victory. "Dad, did you see my goals?" Jake asked breathlessly, throwing himself into Daniel's arms. "I saw everything," Daniel said, hugging his son tightly. "You were incredible out there." Jake noticed Claire standing nearby and regarded her with the frank curiosity of childhood. "Are you Dad's friend?" "I'm hoping to be," Claire said, surprising herself with the honesty. "This is Claire," Daniel said carefully. "She's the lady I told you about, the one who's really smart with computers." "Cool," Jake said with the casual acceptance of youth. "Dad says you're going to build something amazing together." Claire looked at Daniel, who had the grace to look embarrassed. "Does he—" "I may have been optimistic," Daniel admitted. Claire studied them, this man and his son bound together by loss and love, and the kind of fierce loyalty she'd never experienced. She thought about Jenny Martinez and her passionate vision for the future. She thought about Margaret staying late to steal files because it was the right thing to do. She thought about quantum computing and revolutionary algorithms and the chance to build something that mattered. "Jake," she said, making a decision that would change everything. "What would you say if I told you your dad and I were going to start a company together?" "Would it be better than Google?" Jake asked seriously. "Much better," Claire said, looking at Daniel. "If your dad is willing to take the risk." Daniel's smile was brighter than the October sun. "I think we can manage that." "Good," Claire said, feeling pieces of her future clicking into place. "Because I have some investors to call." As they walked toward the parking area, Jake chattering about his goals, and Daniel explaining quantum physics in terms an 11-year-old could understand, Claire felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the excitement of a new beginning. The old Claire Reynolds was gone, destroyed by betrayal and corporate politics. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the woman walking through Riverside Park with a security guard and his soccer-playing son was someone better. Someone who understood that the most important innovations happened when people chose to trust each other. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jenny Martinez. "Been thinking about our conversation. I have ideas. Lots of ideas." Claire smiled and typed back, "Good. We're going to need them." "Everything okay?" Daniel asked, noticing her expression. "Everything's perfect," Claire said, and for the first time in weeks she meant it. The war with Harrison Webb was far from over. In fact, the real battle was just beginning. But as Claire looked at Daniel and Jake, as she thought about Jenny's passion and Margaret's loyalty and the quantum future they could build together, she realized something important. She'd been fighting the wrong war all along. Harrison could have Reynolds tech. Claire Reynolds was going to build something better. They reached Daniel's car, a 10-year-old Honda with a dented bumper and a soccer ball in the back seat, and Claire felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep in her chest. "What's so funny?" Daniel asked. "I just realized something," Claire said, watching Jake climb into the back seat. 3 days ago, I thought success meant corner offices and board meetings and seeing my name in magazines. Now I'm standing in a parking lot with an unemployed security guard and his 11-year-old son planning to revolutionize an entire industry with no money and no resources. And how does that feel?" Claire looked at this man who'd sacrificed his career for her, at his son, who saw possibility where others saw problems, at the city spreading out beyond the park, where millions of people were chasing their own versions of dreams. "Like the best idea I've ever had," she said. "Good," Daniel said, opening the passenger door for her. Because I know someone at MIT who's been working on quantum processing algorithms. She might be interested in what we're building. She, Dr. Sarah Chen, Marcus's sister actually, and she hates her brother almost as much as we do. Claire started laughing and couldn't stop. The irony was too perfect. They were going to build their revolution using the expertise of their enemy's own family. It was audacious and impossible and absolutely brilliant. I think I like this new company already, she said, getting into the car. You haven't heard the best part yet, Daniel said, starting the engine. What's that? We're going to call it quantum dynamics, and we're going to change everything. As they drove through the city toward an uncertain but exhilarating future, Claire found herself thinking about Maya's words from that first terrible day. The people who think they can't win are usually the ones who need to win the most. Maybe Maya was right. Maybe the people who needed to win the most were the ones brave enough to redefine what winning looked like. Maybe success wasn't about power or profit or proving superiority over others. Maybe it was about building something meaningful with people you cared about choosing trust over cynicism, about believing that tomorrow could be better than today. Claire Reynolds was about to find out. 6 weeks later, Claire stood in what used to be a print shop in Brooklyn, watching Daniel install fiber optic cables with the focused intensity of a surgeon. The space was far from glamorous concrete floors, exposed pipes windows that hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration, but it was theirs. Every square foot paid for with Claire's liquidated stock options, and a business loan that had required her to put up her penthouse as collateral. Hand me that crimping tool, Daniel called from his perch on a ladder wrestling with a particularly stubborn cable. Claire passed him the tool, their fingers brushing in a way that still sent electricity up her spine. 6 weeks of 18-hour days together had only intensified whatever was building between them. But they'd both been too focused on survival to acknowledge it. There would be time for feelings later, after they'd proven that quantum dynamics was more than just a desperate dream. Dr. Chen's plane lands at 3, Jenny Martinez announced from her corner workstation, where she was debugging code with the single-minded devotion of a monk at prayer. I've got the MIT presentation loaded and ready to go. Claire felt her stomach tighten with familiar pre-pitched nerves. Dr. Sarah Chen was their white whale, the quantum computing expert whose algorithms could make their vision a reality. She was also Marcus Chen's sister, which added a layer of complexity that made every conversation feel like a diplomatic negotiation. What's our fallback if she says no? Claire asked, though they all knew the answer. There was no fallback. Dr. Chen was the only person in the world with both the expertise they needed and the willingness to consider their unconventional approach. She won't say no, Daniel said with quiet confidence, climbing down from the ladder. Sarah's been frustrated with academic limitations for years. The chance to build something revolutionary from the ground up. She's been waiting her whole career for an opportunity like this. Even if it means working against her brother. Especially because it means working against her brother, Daniel replied, his smile sharp. Trust me, Sarah has no love lost for Marcus and his corporate politics. The door chimed as Margaret entered, carrying coffee for everyone and wearing the expression of someone who'd just received interesting news. She'd joined them 2 weeks ago, taking a massive pay cut to become their first official employee, and her insider knowledge of Reynolds Tech's operations had already proven invaluable. I have an update from the Old Kingdom, Margaret announced, distributing coffee with practiced efficiency. Marcus is struggling. 3 major clients have requested timeline extensions. The Hartfield presentation was a disaster, and rumor has it that Harrison is already looking for his replacement. Claire felt a flicker of satisfaction, quickly followed by something that might have been sympathy. She'd built Reynolds Tech to be more than just another consulting firm, and watching it crumble under mediocre leadership was like watching a loved one waste away. How long before they realize their mistake, she asked. They already know, Margaret said grimly. But corporate pride is a powerful thing. They'll ride that ship all the way to the bottom before admitting they were wrong. Their loss is our gain, Jenny said without looking up from her screen. Half their best engineers are already updating their LinkedIn profiles. When we're ready to start hiring, we'll have our pick of talent. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the front door. Not the casual entrance of someone expected, but the formal rap of someone conducting business. Through the glass, Claire could see a woman in an elegant coat, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the November wind. "Dr. Chen," Daniel said, opening the door with a smile that seemed genuinely warm. "Welcome to Quantum Dynamics." Sarah Chen stepped into their makeshift office with the poise of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any room. She was older than Claire had expected, mid-50s with laugh lines around intelligent brown eyes and the bearing of someone who'd fought for every achievement in a field dominated by men. "This is rustic," Dr. Chen observed, taking in the exposed pipes and concrete floors. "It's honest," Claire replied, extending her hand. "Thank you for making the trip from Boston. I know how valuable your time is. Time is the only resource we can't manufacture more of." Dr. Chen agreed, accepting the handshake. "Though from what Daniel has told me, you might be close to bending even that rule." Claire felt a thrill of excitement. This was what she'd missed most about the early days of Reynolds Tech, the moment when brilliant minds recognized the potential in crazy ideas, when possibility hung in the air like electricity before a storm. "Would you like to see what we're building?" Daniel asked, gesturing toward their prototype setup. For the next 2 hours, they walked Dr. Chen through their vision, watching her expression shift from polite interest to genuine fascination to something that looked like awe. Jenny's code danced across multiple monitors, Daniel's quantum algorithms processing data in ways that shouldn't have been possible, and Claire's business model projecting revenue streams that could revolutionize entire industries. "This is remarkable," Dr. Chen said, finally studying a particularly complex section of code. "You've solved the coherence problem that's been plaguing quantum systems for decades." "Jenny solved it," Daniel corrected, his pride in their young programmer evident. "I just provided the theoretical framework. And you," Dr. Chen turned to Claire, "have figured out how to monetize it without compromising the scientific integrity. That's rarer than you might think." Claire felt warmth spread through her chest. Praise from someone of Dr. Chen's caliber was worth more than any industry award or magazine cover. "The question is," Dr. Chen continued, "what exactly are you offering me?" Claire had prepared for this moment, had rehearsed her pitch until she could deliver it in her sleep. But standing in their ramshackle office, surrounded by the tangible evidence of what they were building together, she found herself abandoning the script. "We're offering you the chance to change the world," she said simply. "Not incrementally, not gradually, but fundamentally. We're offering you resources without red tape, innovation, without committee approval, and the opportunity to see your life's work transform from theory into reality. And then financially, equity stake commensurate with your contribution salary, competitive with MIT, and the potential for returns that could dwarf anything the academic world could offer." Claire paused, meeting Dr. Chen's eyes directly. "But more importantly, we're offering you the chance to build something that matters." Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving from the quantum processors to the code displays to the rough but determined faces of the team that had assembled around this impossible dream. "I have one condition," she said finally. Claire's heart leaped, but she kept her voice steady. "Name it." "I want to meet Jake." The request caught everyone off guard. Claire looked at Daniel, who seemed as surprised as she was. "Jake," Daniel repeated. "My son." "Children see the world differently than adults," Dr. Chen explained. "They're not limited by assumptions about what's possible or impossible. If I'm going to bet my career on this venture, I want to understand the full scope of what we're building. And from what I've heard, Jake is one of your key stakeholders." Daniel's smile was soft and proud. "He gets out of school at 3:30. We could pick him up, bring him by the office." "Perfect," Dr. Chen said. "I'd like to see this operation through fresh eyes." An hour later, Jake Carter burst through the office door with the boundless energy of an 11-year-old who'd just been liberated from 6th grade mathematics. His soccer cleats clattered against the concrete floor as he surveyed the space with obvious delight. "Dad, this is so cool," he exclaimed, immediately gravitating toward the quantum processors. "Is this where you're building the super smart computers?" "Something like that," Daniel said, ruffling his son's hair. "Jake, I'd like you to meet Dr. Chen. She's a scientist from MIT. Jake extended his hand with the formal politeness that Daniel had obviously drilled into him. Nice to meet you, Dr. Chen. Dad says you're really smart with quantum stuff. I try to be, Dr. Chen replied, clearly charmed. What do you think of all this? Jake looked around the office with the serious consideration of someone conducting an important evaluation. It's awesome, but why is everything so spread out? Couldn't you make it more compact? Jenny looked up from her screen, intrigued. What do you mean? Well, Jake said, walking between the different workstations. You've got the computer stuff over here and the code stuff over there and Claire's business stuff way over there. But they're all part of the same thing, right? So wouldn't it work better if they were closer together? The adults exchanged glances. Out of the mouths of babes, Claire thought. They'd been so focused on setting up individual work areas that they'd lost sight of the collaborative nature of what they were building. That's actually a brilliant observation, Dr. Chen said. Integration is key to quantum processing efficiency. The closer the components, the less signal degradation. See, Jake said to his father, I told you I was paying attention when you explained quantum entanglement. You did indeed, Daniel said, his voice thick with pride. For the next hour, they reorganized the office according to Jake's suggestions, creating a central hub where all their systems could interface seamlessly. Dr. Chen worked alongside Jenny to optimize the code integration, while Daniel and Margaret rearranged furniture to create better workflow patterns. Claire found herself directing the reorganization while simultaneously fielding calls from potential investors who'd heard whispers about their project. That was Thomas Wright, she announced after ending her third call of the afternoon. He wants to set up a meeting to discuss funding. Thomas Wright from your old board, Margaret asked, surprise evident in her voice. The same. Apparently he's not entirely comfortable with how things went down at Reynolds Tech. Claire felt a familiar mix of emotions at the mention of her former mentor's name. He's offering to invest personally outside of any board oversight. Can we trust him? Daniel asked, his protective instincts clearly engaged. I don't know, Claire admitted, but we need funding and Thomas has both the capital and the connections to open doors that would otherwise stay closed. Dr. Chen looked up from her integration work with Jenny. What kind of funding are we talking about? Initial round of $5 million with the possibility of $15 million more if we hit certain development milestones. Claire paused, studying the older woman's expression. Which brings me back to my original question. Are you in? Dr. Chen looked around the reorganized office, taking in the quantum processors humming quietly in their new configuration, the code flowing seamlessly across integrated displays, and the team of brilliant misfits who'd somehow found each other in the wreckage of corporate betrayal. I have one more question, she said finally. Shoot. What happens when Marcus figures out what we're building? When he realizes that his sister is working with his former enemies to create technology that could make Reynolds Tech obsolete? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Claire thought about her former colleague, about his ambition and his connections and his willingness to play dirty when necessary. He'll try to stop us, she said simply. He'll use every resource at his disposal, every dirty trick in the corporate playbook, every connection he's cultivated over the years. And Claire looked at Daniel, who was helping Jake understand the quantum processor displays. She looked at Jenny, whose passion for innovation burned brighter than any corporate ambition. She looked at Margaret, who'd sacrificed job security for the chance to do meaningful work. She looked at Dr. Chen herself, brilliant and accomplished, and clearly hungry for the kind of challenge that could define a career. And we'll be ready for him, Claire said with quiet confidence, because we have something he doesn't, which is each other. Claire's voice grew stronger. Marcus builds teams through fear and hierarchy. We're building ours through trust and shared purpose. When the war comes, and it will come, we'll fight as a family. That makes us stronger than any corporate structure he can throw at us. Dr. Chen smiled, and Claire saw her decision in the curve of her lips before she spoke. In that case, Dr. Reynolds, may I call you Claire? I believe you have yourself a quantum computing expert. The cheer that went up from the team was audible 3 blocks away. Jake whooped and did a victory dance that involved more spinning than should have been physically possible. Jenny actually looked up from her computer to grin. Margaret started making notes about office expansion and equipment orders. Daniel's smile was bright enough to power the entire Brooklyn grid. And Claire felt something click into place in her chest, not just professional satisfaction, but personal joy. This was what she'd been missing at Reynolds Tech, what all the corner offices and board meetings and magazine covers couldn't provide, the sense of building something meaningful with people she genuinely cared about. "Welcome to the team, Sarah," she said, extending her hand once more. "I have a feeling we're going to do incredible things together." "I'm counting on it," Dr. Chen replied. "Now shall we discuss my signing bonus?" They spent the rest of the afternoon working out the details of Dr. Chen's contract, their excitement building with each section they negotiated. By the time the November sun set over Brooklyn, they had the foundation of what could become the most revolutionary technology company of the 21st century. As the team prepared to leave for the day, Claire found herself lingering in the office, reluctant to break the spell of what they'd accomplished. Daniel seemed to feel the same way, staying behind to run final checks on the quantum processors, while Jake did homework at Margaret's old desk. "Penny, for your thoughts," Daniel said softly, approaching the window where Claire stood watching the city lights come alive. "I'm thinking about momentum," she replied. "How quickly everything can change when you stop fighting the current and start swimming with it." "Isha, is that what we're doing, swimming with the current?" Claire considered the question seriously. 6 weeks ago, I was CEO of a Fortune 500 company, living in a penthouse, convinced I had everything figured out. Tonight, I'm standing in a converted print shop in Brooklyn, having just recruited a world-class physicist to help us build technology that doesn't technically exist yet. And how does that feel? Like the best decision I've ever made. Claire turned to face him, studying the familiar planes of his face in the office's harsh fluorescent lighting. "Daniel, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "When you quit your job at my building that day, when you walked away from Harrison's offer, what were you thinking?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes searching her face. "I was thinking that some things matter more than security. That some people are worth taking risks for. That sometimes the biggest mistake you can make is playing it safe." "And now, any regrets?" "Only one," Daniel said, stepping closer, "which is that I waited so long to do this." He reached up to cup her face in his hands, his touch gentle and certain, and absolutely right. Claire felt her breath catch as he leaned closer, felt her eyes flutter closed as his lips brushed against hers in a kiss that tasted like possibility and felt like coming home. When they broke apart, Claire rested her forehead against his breathing in the scent of sawdust and coffee, and something uniquely Daniel. "We probably shouldn't," she whispered, though her hands had somehow found their way to his shirt collar. "Probably not," Daniel agreed, though he made no move to step away. Mixing business with pleasure rarely ends well. "We're business partners now. It would be complicated. Incredibly complicated. We should be professional. Maintain appropriate boundaries." "Absolutely," Daniel said and kissed her again. This time the kiss was deeper, more certain, full of weeks of suppressed attraction and the heady rush of shared dreams coming true. Claire felt herself melting against him, felt 6 weeks of careful distance evaporating like morning mist. "Dad? Claire, are you guys hugging?" They broke apart to find Jake standing in the doorway, his backpack slung over one shoulder, and his expression curious, but not particularly surprised. "Something like that," Daniel said, his cheeks slightly flushed. "Cool," Jake said with the casual acceptance of a kid who'd clearly been hoping for this development. "Does this mean Claire's going to come to my soccer games now?" Claire looked at Daniel, who was trying not to laugh, then at Jake, who was regarding them both with obvious approval. "If she wants to," Daniel said carefully. "I want to," Claire heard herself say, surprising them all. "I'd love to come to your soccer games." "Awesome," Jake said. "We're playing the Tigers on Saturday. They're really good, but I think we can beat them if Tommy remembers to pass the ball." "I'll be there," Claire promised, feeling something warm and unfamiliar settle in her chest. Family. This was what family felt like. As they prepared to leave the office, locking up their quantum processors and their revolutionary dreams for the night, Claire's phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Wright. "Dinner tomorrow to discuss funding. Bring the team." I want to meet the people who are going to change the world." "Thomas wants to meet everyone," she announced, showing the text to Daniel. "Think he's serious about investing." "I think he's serious about making amends," Claire said, "and I think he recognizes genius when he sees it. Even if that genius comes with relationship complications," Daniel asked, his smile teasing. "Especially then," Claire replied, catching his hand in hers. "The best innovations always come from unexpected combinations." They walked out into the Brooklyn night together. Daniel and Jake and Claire, their breath visible in the cold air, their future stretched out before them like an unwritten symphony. Behind them, the office hummed with the quiet power of quantum processors and revolutionary dreams. Ahead of them, Thomas Wright waited with funding and connections, and the chance to turn their impossible vision into reality. But in that moment, walking through the familiar strange streets of Brooklyn, with her hand in Daniel's and Jake chattering about soccer strategies, Claire Reynolds felt like she'd already won the most important prize of all, the chance to build something meaningful with people she loved. The war with Harrison Webb and Marcus Chen was far from over. In fact, Claire suspected it was about to escalate in ways they couldn't imagine. But as she looked at Daniel's profile in the streetlight glow, as she listened to Jake explain the finer points of sixth-grade social dynamics, as she thought about Sarah Chen's brilliance and Jenny's passion and Margaret's loyalty, she realized something important. Let them come. Let Harrison and Marcus and all the rest of them bring their corporate politics and their dirty tricks and their desperate attempts to maintain the status quo. Quantum dynamics had something more powerful than money or connections or institutional inertia. They had each other, and in the end, that would make all the difference. "Claire," Jake's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Yeah. I'm really glad you and Dad found each other. He's been sad for a long time, but he's not sad anymore." Claire felt tears prick her eyes, felt Daniel's hand tighten around hers. "I'm glad too," she said softly. "I'm really, really glad." And as they disappeared into the Brooklyn night, three people who'd found family in the wreckage of their old lives. The quantum processors hummed quietly in their empty office, calculating possibilities and processing dreams and preparing for the moment when the impossible would become inevitable. The future was quantum, and it belonged to them. 3 months after Thomas Wright's investment dinner, Claire stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Quantum Dynamics' new Manhattan office, watching snow fall on the city that had once been her kingdom. The space was everything their Brooklyn workshop hadn't been: sleek, modern, impressive enough to intimidate competitors and inspire confidence in investors. But she found herself missing the exposed pipes and concrete floors, the honest simplicity of a place where dreams were built with determination rather than decorated with success. "The Wall Street Journal wants a statement about the Peterson Industries acquisition," Jenny called from her workstation, where 3 monitors displayed code that was already revolutionizing data processing across 6 different industries. "Should I tell them you're in meetings all day?" "Tell them the truth," Claire replied, turning from the window. "That we're too busy changing the world to waste time on corporate gossip." It had been a remarkable 3 months. Thomas Wright's initial investment had opened doors that led to more doors, each one revealing new possibilities, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that quantum computing could reshape entire industries. The Peterson Industries acquisition was just the latest milestone, a $50 million deal that would give them access to manufacturing capabilities they'd only dreamed of in Brooklyn. But success, Claire was learning, came with its own complications. "Claire," Margaret's voice carried a note of concern. "Harrison Webb is here to see you." The words sent ice through Claire's veins. She hadn't seen Harrison since that final board meeting, hadn't spoken to him since the day she'd been escorted from her own building. His presence here felt like a violation, an intrusion of her old life into the new world she'd built. "Did he say what he wants?" "He says it's personal." Claire looked around the office at her team, her family, and felt protective instincts surge through her. Whatever Harrison wanted, it wouldn't be good. Men like him didn't make social calls on former enemies unless they had an agenda. "Have security escort him to conference room B," she said finally, "and ask Daniel to join us. I don't want to be alone with him." 10 minutes later, Claire sat across from Harrison Webb in a room that still smelled of new carpet and fresh paint. He looked older than she remembered, his silver hair, thinner, his expensive suit unable to disguise the fact that something fundamental had shifted in his bearing. Success had always fit him like a second skin, but today he wore it like an ill-fitting costume. Daniel sat beside her, his presence both comforting and protective. They'd been careful about displaying their relationship in professional settings. But there was something about Harrison's calculated smile that made Claire grateful for the solidarity of having someone she trusted at her side. "Claire," Harrison said, his voice carrying the same false warmth she remembered. "You look well. Success suits you." "What do you want, Harrison?" "Straight to business, I see. I always admired that about you." He leaned back in his chair, projecting the kind of casual confidence that had once intimidated her. "I'm here to make you an offer." "I'm not interested in whatever you're selling." "You haven't heard what I'm offering yet." Harrison's smile widened. Tecton Solutions wants to acquire Quantum Dynamics. Full acquisition, premium valuation, complete integration of your technology into our existing platforms. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Claire felt Daniel tense beside her, felt her own pulse quicken with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You want to buy us?" she said slowly. "I want to give you the chance to be part of something bigger," Harrison corrected. Tecton has the resources, the infrastructure, the global reach that a company like yours needs to truly scale. We could take your quantum computing breakthrough and deploy it worldwide within 18 months. Under Tecton's control. Under proper management, Harrison replied smoothly. "Claire, you've proven your point. You've shown that you can innovate, that you can build something remarkable from nothing. But innovation and business management are different skills. Let the professionals handle the corporate side while you focus on what you do best." Claire looked at this man who'd once held her professional fate in his hands, who'd orchestrated her downfall with calculated precision, who was now sitting in her conference room offering to buy the company she'd built from the ashes of his betrayal. "And what exactly are you offering?" $200 million, Harrison said without hesitation, plus stock options in Tecton that could be worth twice that within 5 years. Your entire team would be retained, your technology would get the resources it deserves, and you'd never have to worry about funding or scaling or any of the mundane realities of running a business again. It was, Claire had to admit, a staggering offer. $200 million would set her up for life, would provide security for Daniel. And Jake would ensure that her team was taken care of regardless of what happened to the quantum computing market. It was also everything she'd sworn she'd never accept again. "That's very generous," she said carefully. "But I'm curious, why now? Why make this offer when you could have simply stolen our technology or undermined our funding?" Harrison's mask slipped slightly, revealing something that might have been desperation. "Because your quantum processors are working. Because you've solved problems that our best engineers couldn't crack. Because Peterson Industries was supposed to be our client, and instead they chose a startup operating out of a Brooklyn warehouse." There it was, the truth beneath the corporate doublespeak. Quantum Dynamics wasn't just succeeding. They were winning. They were taking clients, disrupting markets, proving that innovation mattered more than infrastructure. "So this isn't an acquisition," Claire said. "It's a surrender." "It's a merger between equals," Harrison insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Equals." Daniel spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but sharp. "You destroyed Claire's career, stole her company, and tried to ruin her reputation. Now you want to buy the company she built to replace what you took. That doesn't sound like equals to me." Harrison's gaze shifted to Daniel, and Claire saw recognition flicker in his eyes. "Mr. Carter, I should have known you'd be here. Tell me, how does it feel to be sleeping with the enemy?" "Careful," Claire said, ice forming in her voice. "You're a guest in my building." "Am I?" Harrison leaned forward, his predatory smile returning. "Because I've been wondering about something. Mr. Carter here was supposed to be gathering intelligence for me, reporting on your activities, your mental state, your vulnerabilities. Instead, he seems to have developed complications." Claire felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. She'd known about Daniel's original assignment, had worked through the betrayal and chosen forgiveness. But hearing Harrison discuss it so casually, so cruelly, brought all the old anger rushing back. "That was a long time ago," Daniel said steadily. "Was it?" "Because I'm curious about the timing of certain events." Your relationship with Claire began right around the time quantum dynamics started making breakthrough progress. Convenient, don't you think? What are you suggesting? Claire asked, though she dreaded the answer. Harrison's smile was sharp as a blade. I'm suggesting that Mr. Carter's loyalties might not be as clear as you think. That perhaps his romantic interest in you serves a purpose beyond personal satisfaction. The words hit like physical blows. Claire felt the familiar spiral of doubt beginning in her chest, the old fears about trust and betrayal threatening to overwhelm her rational mind. She looked at Daniel, searching his face for denial, for outrage, for anything that would prove Harrison wrong. Instead, she saw guilt. Daniel. Her voice was barely above a whisper. It's not what you think, Daniel said quickly. I swear to you, Claire, it's not what you think. Then what is it? Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes filled with pain and regret. Harrison did contact me again. 3 weeks ago. He offered me money to sabotage our quantum processors, to steal our algorithms, to feed him information about our client list. The confession hit Claire like a sledgehammer. 3 weeks ago. Right around the time they'd landed their biggest contract, right when Daniel had been working late nights on processor optimization, right when she'd been trusting him with her company's most sensitive information. And she managed. And I told him to go to hell, Daniel said fiercely. I told him that you were worth 100 of him, that quantum dynamics was building something that mattered, and that I'd rather lose everything than betray the people I love. But you didn't tell me, Claire said, the words scraping her throat raw. You didn't warn me that he was still trying to use you. I was protecting you, Daniel protested. I didn't want you to have to worry about his schemes when you were focused on building our future. Our future? Claire stood abruptly, pacing toward the window. Or his future. How do I know this isn't all part of some elaborate game? How do I know you didn't take his money and feed him just enough information to make this acquisition offer possible? Because you know me, Daniel said desperately. Because you've seen who I really am. Because what we have together is real. Harrison watched this exchange with obvious satisfaction, a cat playing with wounded mice. This is all very touching, but it doesn't change the fundamental question. Claire, do you really want to build your future on a foundation of uncertainty? On a relationship that began with deception and continues to involve secrets? Claire stared out at the city below, watching people move through their lives like ants in a vast colony. 3 months ago, she'd been certain that Daniel was different, that their connection transcended the corporate games and personal betrayals that had defined her old life. Now, standing in her conference room, while the two men who'd shaped her recent history argued over her trust, she felt the familiar weight of isolation settling around her like armor. I need to think, she said finally. Of course, Harrison said smoothly. But don't think too long. Offers like this have expiration dates, and the market for quantum computing is evolving rapidly. Today's breakthrough becomes tomorrow's industry standard. The window for maximum return is closing. He stood straightening his tie with practiced precision. I'll give you 48 hours to decide. After that, Tecton will pursue other options for quantum integration. Is that a threat? It's a business reality, Harrison replied. With or without your cooperation, Tecton will have quantum computing capabilities within 6 months. The only question is whether you'll be part of that success or competing against it. After he left, Claire and Daniel sat in silence, the weight of unspoken accusations and damaged trust filling the space between them. Through the glass walls of the conference room, Claire could see her team working, Jenny debugging code with passionate intensity, Margaret coordinating client communications, Dr. Chen reviewing quantum processor specifications with the focused attention of someone solving the universe's mysteries, one equation at a time. Say something, Daniel said finally. Anything. What do you want me to say? Claire's voice was hollow. That I understand why you kept Harrison's contact secret. That I'm grateful you protected me from information I needed to make informed decisions about my own company. I want you to say that you trust me. That you know I would never betray you or this company or what we've built together. Claire turned to look at him, studying the familiar planes of his face. The gray eyes that had once seemed like windows to his soul, but now felt opaque and unreadable. I thought I knew that, she said quietly. 3 months ago, I would have bet my life on it. But now Now I'm wondering what else you haven't told me. What other secrets you're keeping to protect me from my own business." "There's nothing else," Daniel said desperately. "I swear to you, Claire Harrison's call was the only contact. I told you because I couldn't stand having secrets between us anymore. You told me because Harrison forced your hand. If he hadn't mentioned it, would you ever have said anything?" Daniel's silence was answer enough. Claire stood smoothing her skirt with hands that trembled slightly. "I need some air. I need to think about Harrison's offer, about what's best for the company, about what's best for everyone." "Claire, please don't do this. Don't let him win by turning us against each other." "Isn't that what he's already done?" Claire's smile was bitter. "Isn't that exactly what's happening right now?" She left Daniel sitting alone in the conference room and walked through the office that had been their dream-made manifest. Jenny looked up as she passed, concern flickering in her young features. Dr. Chen paused in her work to offer a questioning smile. Margaret half rose from her chair, clearly sensing the emotional storm brewing around her employer. Claire managed a reassuring nod for each of them, maintaining the facade of control until she reached the elevator. Only when the doors closed and she was alone did she allow her carefully constructed composure to crack. The building's roof was empty except for the wind and the distant sounds of the city far below. Claire stood at the edge, not contemplating anything dramatic, but simply needing to feel small in the face of something vast and indifferent. The snow had stopped, leaving the air clean and sharp and brutally honest. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Dad, seems sad. Did something happen?" The message hit her like a physical blow. In all her anger and hurt and confusion, she'd forgotten about the 11-year-old boy who'd become part of her world, who looked forward to her presence at his soccer games, who'd started calling her by name instead of Dad's friend. Whatever happened between her and Daniel, Jake would be caught in the middle, another casualty of adult complications he hadn't created and couldn't control. Another text arrived, this one from Thomas Wright. "Heard about Harrison's visit. Whatever he offered, we can match it. Don't let him steal your future." Then Margaret. "The team is worried. Are we okay?" Then Dr. Chen, "Quantum processing requires delicate balance. So do human relationships. Both can survive temporary instability if the foundation remains sound." Claire stared at her phone, at the messages from people who'd chosen to believe in her vision, who'd sacrificed security and comfort to build something meaningful together. 48 hours to decide whether to sell everything they'd worked for, to dissolve the family they'd created, to return to the corporate world she'd fought so hard to escape. Or 48 hours to choose trust over cynicism, love over fear, the possibility of heartbreak over the certainty of regret. The roof door opened behind her, and Claire turned to see Daniel approaching cautiously, his coat collar turned up against the wind. "Jake texted you, didn't he?" she asked. "He's worried about us, about all of us." Daniel stopped a few feet away, respecting her space while making his presence known. "Claire, I know I screwed up. I know I should have told you about Harrison's call immediately, but I need you to understand something." "What?" "I've lost everything once. My wife, my daughter, my career, my entire life gone in an instant because of one drunk driver's bad decision. When I found you, when I found this team, this purpose, this chance to build something meaningful again, I couldn't bear the thought of losing it." Claire felt tears freezing on her cheeks. "So you decided to control the information I received, to make my decisions for me." "I decided to protect what matters most," Daniel said quietly. "But I was wrong. I was treating you like someone who needed protection instead of someone who deserved trust. I was so afraid of losing you that I forgot why you were worth having in the first place." "And what's that?" "Because you're the strongest person I've ever known. Because you face impossible odds and find ways to win. Because you build families out of strangers and turn dreams into reality through sheer force of will." Daniel's voice broke slightly. "Because you deserve someone who trusts you completely, not someone who tries to shield you from the world." Claire looked at this man who'd become so central to her life, who'd helped her rebuild from nothing, who'd chosen her over security and comfort, and the easy path of compromise. She thought about Harrison's offer, about the safety of selling out, about the tempting simplicity of letting someone else handle the hard decisions. Then she thought about Jake's smile when she attended his soccer games, about Jenny's passion for code that could change the world, about Dr. Chen's brilliance unleashed from academic constraints, about Margaret's loyalty and Thomas Wright's belief in the quantum processors humming in their office below, calculating possibilities and processing dreams. "Daniel," she said finally. "Yeah, Harrison's 48-hour deadline. What about it?" Claire smiled, feeling something crystallize in her chest, not just forgiveness, but resolve. "I think we should use it." "For what?" "To show him exactly what quantum dynamics is capable of when we stop playing defense and start playing offense." She pulled out her phone and dialed Jenny's number. "Jenny, I need you to run a complete analysis of Tecton's quantum computing research. I want to know everything: their algorithms, their processing speeds, their client applications. Everything." "That might take some time," Jenny's voice crackled through the speaker. "You have 47 hours, Claire said. "Think that's enough?" Jenny's laugh was pure delight. "More than enough. What are we planning?" "A demonstration," Claire said, looking at Daniel. "A very public demonstration of exactly why Tecton needs to acquire us, instead of the other way around." She hung up and turned to Daniel, who was watching her with something that looked like awe. "So we're not selling?" he asked. "We're not selling. We're not surrendering. We're not backing down." Claire stepped closer, close enough to see the relief flooding his gray eyes. "But we are setting some new ground rules. Such as, no more secrets, no more protecting me from information I need, no more making decisions about my company without consulting me first." Claire reached up to cup his face in her hands. "Can you live with that?" "I can live with that," Daniel said, leaning into her touch. "Can you live with loving someone who's terrified of losing you?" "I can live with that," Claire said. "As long as you can live with loving someone who's going to keep taking crazy risks and making impossible decisions and probably scaring you on a regular basis." "I think I can manage," Daniel said, and kissed her with the desperate relief of someone who'd almost lost everything and found it returned to him beyond his wildest hopes. When they broke apart, Claire rested her forehead against his breathing and the scent of snow and possibility and the future they were choosing to build together. "So what exactly are we going to show Harrison in 47 hours?" Daniel asked. Claire's smile was sharp as winter wind. "That quantum dynamics doesn't just have better technology than Tecton. We have better everything." The next 46 hours passed in a blur of caffeine and code, and the kind of intense collaboration that only happened when brilliant people were united by common purpose. Jenny worked with Dr. Chen to optimize their quantum processors beyond anything they'd achieved before. Margaret coordinated with Thomas Wright to arrange a public demonstration that would showcase their capabilities to the entire tech industry. Daniel and Claire worked side by side, their relationship stronger. For having survived its latest test, their shared vision clearer than ever. At 2 p.m. on the day of Harrison's deadline, the quantum dynamics team gathered in the conference room of the Marriott Marquis, facing an audience that included tech journalists, industry analysts, potential clients, and Harrison Webb himself. The man who'd once destroyed Claire's career sat in the front row, his expression unreadable, his expensive suit, a reminder of the corporate world she'd left behind. "Ladies and gentlemen," Claire began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd learned to trust herself completely. 3 months ago, quantum dynamics was nothing more than an idea and a dream. Today, we're going to show you the future. What followed was the most brilliant hour of Claire's professional life. Jenny demonstrated quantum algorithms that processed data faster than anything currently available. Dr. Chen explained the theoretical breakthroughs that made their technology possible. Daniel showed how their quantum processors could revolutionize everything from medical research to climate modeling to financial analysis. But the real moment came when Claire looked directly at Harrison Webb and said, "Some people see innovation as a threat to be controlled or acquired. We see it as a gift to be shared. That's why quantum dynamics will never be for sale. That's why we'll always choose growth over safety, possibility over profit, and trust over control. The applause was thunderous. Tech journalists scrambled to ask questions. Industry analysts updated their reports in real time. Potential clients lined up to discuss contracts. And Harrison Webb sat in his front row seat watching his acquisition target transform into his most formidable competitor. After the presentation, as the crowd dispersed and contracts were signed, and the future began reshaping itself around quantum possibilities, Harrison approached Claire one last time. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Yes, it is," Claire replied with absolute certainty. "It's been over since the day you underestimated what people can accomplish when they choose each other over everything else." Harrison's smile was cold. "We'll see." But Claire was no longer interested in his threats or his games or his desperate attempts to remain relevant in a world that was moving beyond him. She had quantum processors to optimize a company, to grow a family, to nurture, and a future to build with people who believed in something bigger than themselves. 6 months later, Claire stood once again at floor-to-ceiling windows, but this time she wasn't alone. Daniel worked beside her. Jake did homework at a desk they'd set up specially for him and their team. Their family filled the expanded office with the sounds of innovation and laughter and shared purpose. Quantum Dynamics had gone public the previous month, the IPO raising enough capital to fund research for the next decade. Reynolds Tech, under Marcus Chen's leadership, had been quietly absorbed by a larger firm after losing too many clients to maintain independence. Harrison Webb had retired to a consulting role that everyone understood meant he'd been pushed aside by younger, smarter, more adaptable minds. But the real victory wasn't in stock prices or market share or the tech industry's acknowledgement of their revolutionary breakthrough. The real victory was in the small moments that made up their daily lives. Jake's excitement when he showed them a particularly difficult math problem he'd solved. Jenny's joy when a new algorithm exceeded all performance expectations. Dr. Chen's satisfaction as she pushed quantum theory into previously impossible territories. "Penny for your thoughts," Daniel said, approaching with 2 cups of coffee and the easy smile that still made Claire's heart skip. "I'm thinking about coffee," she said, accepting the cup gratefully. "Coffee. The first day we met when my card was declined and you paid for my coffee. I thought it was the worst day of my life. And now," Claire looked around the office at the life they'd built together. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real and meaningful and infinitely precious. She thought about the quantum processors humming in their specially designed housing, about the clients whose problems they were solving, about the young engineers they were mentoring, about the future they were creating, one impossible breakthrough at a time. "Now I think it was the day my real life began." Daniel's smile was brighter than the spring sunshine flooding through their windows. "In that case, maybe we should go back to Café Luna tonight, for old time's sake." "I'd like that," Claire said, "but this time I'm buying." "Deal," Daniel said, and kissed her in the office they'd built together, surrounded by the family they'd chosen, quantum processors, calculating the infinite possibilities that stretched out before them like an uncharted ocean of dreams. Through the windows, Manhattan pulsed with life. 8 million people pursuing their own versions of success, fighting their own battles, building their own futures. But in the offices of Quantum Dynamics 3 floors above the street, where Claire Reynolds had once thought her world was ending, a different kind of success was being written. One that measured victory not in stock prices or board positions or magazine covers, but in the trust between people who'd chosen each other over everything else. It wasn't about the coffee, Claire thought as she watched Daniel explain quantum entanglement to Jake with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. It had never been about the coffee. It was about finding the people who would pay for your coffee when your card was declined, who would quit their jobs rather than betray you, who would choose your dreams over their security. It was about building something meaningful with people you loved, about taking impossible risks and making them possible through sheer force of shared will. As the afternoon sun painted their office in shades of gold and possibility, Claire Reynolds, CEO, innovator, dreamer, and most importantly, someone who'd learned to trust again, smiled and got back to work. There were quantum barriers to break, worlds to change, and futures to build. And she wasn't building them alone. It was never about the coffee. The words that would close their story, Claire realized, were also the beginning of all the stories yet to come.